Web3 with Me is a discussion-style podcast about the ins and outs of Web 3.0, hosted by Zach French, known as Off Edge in the verse. From crypto to NFTs, DAOs to DeFi, we cover the abstract philosophical promises and the new business models enabled in this new decentralized world. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or watch the show on YouTube. Thanks and enjoy.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with Me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with Me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with Me.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being listeners of Web3 with Me. I want to take a few seconds to tell you about my exciting new B2B offering. It is the mission here to educate. I sincerely believe Web3 can make the world better for more people. Businesses shouldn't be left out though, so I've launched the Web3 Coach. It's a bespoke education experience designed to help your team understand how Web3 affects your particular industry or company and identify opportunities unique to Web3. Whether you have a law or accounting firm with a growing number of clients participating in Web3 through crypto and NFTs, or you're a real estate syndicate looking for different ways to raise money, or teams just of fast-growing Web3 companies who want to understand your customers and your new teammates, I make sure you can talk the talk and leave feeling more confident about this crazy new world. Please take a minute to check out my website at theweb3coach.xyz. Thanks so much and enjoy the show. My guest today is Alexander Zwerner, founder of Kickback, a Web3 native podcast monetization application. His passion for Web3 and podcasting are only matched by his drive and determination throughout his life. He started his first company in middle school, authored a book by his sophomore year of high school, and self-taught himself to be an engineer. Now he has his sights set on the podcasting world and monetizing it to deliver more value back to podcasters. LFG baby, let's start vibing. Welcome to the show, Alexander.
Yeah, really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love meeting new people in this space because every time I meet someone new, I get reinvigorated and energized. And we had an awesome conversation last week. We share a passion for podcasts. We're both creating in a unique way, which we'll get to in a little while. But I always want to start with letting the audience get to know you a little bit better. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Alexander. I've been in the Web3 and audio space for the last 5 years or so. Started off in the music world, did a lot of journalism, talked to artists, went to concerts, wrote a book about the history of hip hop. So was really, really heavy into the music journalism side. And, was getting up towards the end of high school, and I was thinking and looking at all the big music companies. I always had this dream of, helping creators in the music economy and building a big company off of that. And I looked at the companies that were out there. They're all tech companies. And I was like, well, I don't even know how to code. So how am I going to do that? So that was during COVID. Self-taught myself how to code in back end and front end and all that type of stuff. And created my first website, my first company called Beatly Music. It was sort of like the Rotten Tomatoes for music. After leaving college or after leaving high school, I really got interested in a lot of the stuff that was revolving around Web3 and specifically NFTs. I had a lot of these friends that were managers and artists, and I was talking to this manager, and he was talking to me about how one of his artists was making no money in music before the pandemic, and I was making boatloads of money in Web3 and NFTs. And I was like, well, what even the hell are NFTs? So really got into NFTs and the code behind it with Ethereum, and was as part of like my, sort of leap into this whole world of Web3, I started co-producing a lot of podcasts in the industry. So co-produced podcasts for Orange DAO and Metacartel, and really got interested in a lot of things going on. And while I was in the podcast space, specifically, while I was leading monetization at the podcast hatchery for Bankless DAO, which is one of the big decentralized media companies. I was creating these NFT subscription models for podcasting. And, everyone in the podcast hatchery thought it was wildly interesting. It was super helpful. And, while I was creating it, I was like, oh, like this stuff could be useful for everyone, not just the podcast hatchery. So sort of spun it off from Bankless DAO into my own company, which is what I'm working on right now, Kickback Podcasts. It's a Web3 podcast player playing on this idea of, you know, making money off your 1,000 true fans, connecting with your biggest fans, and, getting upside for your attention on the platform via, sort of this listen to earn metric that we've seen with a lot of games. Instead of play to earn, we're doing listen to earn. So really playing a lot into a lot of these really interesting Web3 technologies. But yeah, it's a very exciting space. I've been in the audio industry for five plus years, and I feel like this is sort of the culmination of everything I've done.
That's cool. It's cool to have a culmination. I'm not to put you on the spot or anything, but you're actually the youngest guest I've ever had too. And you've already done all these things.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years, which we'll get to a little bit later. I do want to unpack the book you wrote a little bit. That's pretty cool. Like what was the foundation for that? Why did you decide I want to write a book instead of writing a blog or starting a podcast or some other form of content?
Yeah. I've always, before all this music and all this audio type stuff, I was a big time basketball player, played pretty high level, thought I was going to go D1 originally. And then, decided to come to just a college, not for basketball, to pursue a lot of my academic dreams and hopes in the audio industry. But yeah, I mean, for me, I played basketball really, really heavily in the Atlanta sphere. And, in Atlanta, hip hop and basketball are so intertwined. So that was sort of my like step into or introduction to the music industry as a whole. Like we would, where I played basketball for my travel team, we had a record studio right next to us. So we'd be coming in and playing basketball, and there'd be people recording songs right next to us. You could hear it through the walls and all this stuff. It was crazy setup. But I always really valued the basketball experiences I had. I feel like it was a big part of who I am today. And I sort of wanted to give back to that, music and basketball scene in Atlanta. And so I wrote a book about the history of hip hop, sort of trying to, expand on the history that was out there, self-published it on Amazon, and, decided to give all the revenue I made from the book to a lot of the foundations that were crucial to me and my teammates. The two biggest charities I give to from that book are, 100 Black Men of Atlanta, which really helped support a lot of my teammates on my basketball team. And then the Atlanta Boys and Girls Club, which was also really integral to, the spaces we were playing in as well. So it was music has always been a big part of where I've been in my life. And I sort of want to give back to it through that book that I wrote.
That's cool. And kind of itch the social bug, which is good, right? Like you're being very socially conscious. I feel like that's a theme of both your generation and my generation, right? Like we're a little bit less concerned with profits, though we do realize they are necessary.
Yeah.
And a little bit more concerned with how can we give back, right? How can we have a bigger impact? I've been really focused on that lately, but I do want to ask you one more question. How long did it take you to write the book? How did you do your research? What was your kind of method when you did it? I mean, that part is just intriguing to me.
Yeah. I did all this, short form journalism, I would say. So, 500 to 1,000 word pieces on musicians and songs and all this type of stuff. And, from that, I had a lot of experience in sort of detailing the intricacies of music. But I never really had any writing about history experience. Right. So that was a completely new forte for me. How I really got into it to sort of get that background and to eventually create that book. I talked with a lot of, artists in the music scene, people that were at the original 1980s New York party that started a lot of this hip hop scene. And so really just went out there and, network connected with a bunch of really, really interesting musicians in the industry. And then basically took all those experiences, took a bunch of readings from the history already out there, and sort of culminated it into one book, which is out there on Amazon.
That's cool. Yeah. So you kind of took like you were already writing about music. So
Yeah.
you had an idea for the current scene of music very
Yes.
well. So you knew what you might want to learn about the previous history of music too.
Mhm.
And then you just went on this journey, which it sounds like you were happy to learn about this stuff
Yes.
and share it with everybody else and synthesize it. And you were working towards a clear goal, which was like giving back, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's super cool. That's super cool. So then you go off to college, you after you've written this book. And are you still promoting the book at all, or are you kind of like at that point moving on to actually being a college kid?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to go back and like sort of rewrite it. I wrote it when I was super, super young, like a sophomore in high school. So wrote like a 60, 70 page book in high school. Like I wouldn't say it's my best work. I think I've definitely
Really?
grown. Yeah, I mean, personally, I would say. But I've definitely grown as a writer since then. You know, that was sort of towards the start of my, music journalism career. I've definitely grown since then, done 50 plus articles since the launch of that book. But yeah, I mean it's definitely a dream for me to one day when I'm older, when I've actually have all this writing experience, and go back and sort of just rewrite the whole book, and do a music journalism part 2, and just do a whole like massive 200 300 page book about it. I definitely, it was a really good learning experience for me. I think it definitely taught me a lot about sort of that long form writing, which I really didn't get before. And sort of it was a good experience, just giving back to something that I felt like it was so integral in my life, really, when I was younger. And so yeah, I mean it's definitely definitely a passion of mine. But yeah, I mean I definitely want to rewrite it sometime in the future. We just have to figure out when.
Ah, man, for sure. Yeah, right now it's all about kickback, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about this the incubator that you were doing at Bankless. I believe it's called the Hatchery, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
So how did that come about?
yeah, so I was working on this podcast for Metacartel, and it was actually a really big influence into what I'm working on right now, and actually led to the problems I've seen in the podcast industry. So I was working on this podcast for Metacartel, and we had
What?
like,
1 second. What is Metacartel? Just in case our audience is not
yeah,
familiar.
sure. Well, so Metacartel is sort of like a investment DAO. It has some of the biggest, CEOs and founders in Web3 in this DAO. They basically give anywhere from 20 to 100K to the DAO, and then they invest that into Web3 companies. They're invested in big companies, ranging from DeFi to commercial consumer products. And I reached out to them, said I had this experience co-producing podcasts for Orange DAO and other DAOs, and said I wanted to help out and create this podcast for Metacartel. And we got connected, or I got connected with one of the admins, the leaders of the DAO, and we started working on this podcast. And unfortunately, right, there are tons of people that create podcasts out there and make no money. And they do it because they just love it. And that's their passion. And we were sort of creating this podcast because we wanted to get the word out there about Web3. And, the people that were working in it had, big time jobs at Metacartel, were investing all this money. And so they needed like money to work, so it was, we unfortunately had to shut down the Metacartel podcast, because it just wasn't making any money, and
Sure.
it wasn't going to make money for a long time.
There's an opportunity cost of people's time.
Yes, opportunity cost of people's time. And these guys were, like one of the guy that was going to host the podcast, a guy named Yaler, super super funny guy. But he was like flying over to the Bahamas to talk to FDX and flying all over the place. And he was just like, I love podcasting, but this is just making me way more money than I can do with podcasting right now.
That's what makes, just one quick aside, that's what makes the All In podcast, I feel like, so crazy, that these
Yes.
people have like their time value of money. They're probably worth what, like $10,000 an hour
Oh yeah,
minimum
completely.
for all those guys over there. So yeah, I get his point. I mean, sometimes it's not worth it. So, but hats off to All In for continuing to do it, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so basically it was just like, I just don't see a place for this podcast to make money, just no podcast to make money in Web3, or in the general podcast industry. And so we have, unfortunately had to shut down the podcast. I had a really good time, loved the people I was working with. But I had to move on, and sort of took that experience and definitely played a big role in what, eventually became Kickback. But was searching around for, new opportunities. Bankless DAO is, pretty well known. They're a subsidiary essentially of Bankless HQ, which is one of the biggest podcasts in Web3. And so I joined the DAO, reached out to the person that was launching, or was the head of this podcast hatchery. And essentially the podcast hatchery, for people that don't know, is, this group of people who come together to just pump out Web3 podcasts all day, every day. So we currently have 3 podcasts that have been created from this sort of incubator within Bankless DAO. And we're planning on creating, a number of more, several more podcasts after that. But I joined the DAO, and I was in this podcast hatchery, joining the meetings and talking to these people, and they loved podcasting to death. These would just do podcasting if they're making no money ever. And they absolutely loved it. And but the problem was they had no clue how to make money, like with any of this stuff. They weren't even like looking at it, right? Because like for them, they cared about creating the episodes. And so they didn't really care about, going out there getting sponsors or going out there and getting grant money. So they really just had like 20 people working on podcasts and 0 people working on monetization, which I thought was crazy. So I came in and I was like, hey, I'll go out there, I'll try to figure out this monetization stuff. You guys work on the podcast, and we'll come together and make this a real podcast. Podcasts for 5-10 years, make that sort of sustainable podcast, they got to be making money. And the whole drive for the podcast hatchery is to create, long lasting podcasts. And for me, I was like, well, we got to be making money with these if we want to make it long lasting. So came in there, started creating monetization. And for us, like we wanted to create stuff that was, unique to Web3 podcasts, right? Like we've seen a lot of Web2 podcasts, and they make money with, sponsorships, or, host read ads. Those are the real ways that podcasts make money in Web2. And, if you look at the podcast industry, that's really just not working out. Like the podcast industry has 500 million global listeners, yet it makes 95% less than the music industry, which has a similar amount of global listeners. So there's like clear deficiencies in the monetization side of podcasts. And so we were really thinking a lot about, how do we create things that are super unique to Web3 and specifically podcasting. And, what we were really thinking about is ways in which to, sell NFTs for a lot of the either subscriptions of the podcast or through episodes of the podcast. We've seen a lot of experimentation with this idea of NFT subscriptions and NFT episodes. And so we were really like leading the charge for that. I think the only other podcast that we've really seen that has done anything in that sector was a podcast named Rehash. They sell NFT episodes of all their episodes. They sort of, every time you buy an episode, you get put into a DAO where you can vote on guests and the questions for the next guest, and all really exciting things. And so for me, I was, creating this super interesting stuff for podcasting, and sort of spun it off with that last experience for Metacartel. I was like, like this monetization problem is much bigger than the podcast hatchery. All podcasts struggle to make money. The real only way to make money right now in the podcast industry is to just sell your podcast to Spotify, right? Joe Rogan, a bunch of these other podcasts have done all this type of stuff just to sell their podcast to Spotify, because they're just not making the same amount of money that they would if they sold their podcast to Spotify, right? Like Joe Rogan made, I think it was around $100 million or something ridiculous. He would have never made that money with sponsors in the traditional Web2 monetization tactics. So the clear choice for him was to sell his podcast. And, he's had some guff from that. He's had a lot of pushback from the Spotify company. He said some controversial things, and it's sort of shown like selling your podcast to Spotify may be great, like monetization wise, like that may be the best way to make money, but you lose a lot of that sort of creative freedom. So at Kickback, we're trying to keep that creative freedom, allow creators to make more money than they would selling their podcast to Spotify, and do some really exciting stuff with Web3. I think the technology, we've seen a big influx of Web3 technology into music, but we've seen almost none in podcasting. And for me, like music is a mature market. I know like artists don't make that much money. I've been in the music industry. I know it like firsthand. But the music market is much, much more mature than podcasting. Podcasting, I believe, hasn't hit mainstream yet. Like there hasn't been, there isn't like a Drake a podcasting. Maybe Joe Rogan, you can call him that. But there hasn't really been this real influx of mainstream podcasts that everyone knows. And I think that's really just because, podcasts just aren't making money. And I think that once we sort of fix that with some of this Web3 technology that we're implementing, really have some really exciting podcasts that come out of it. So yeah, I mean, I'm super excited about the space. I think Web3 brings a lot of interesting technology into it. I think podcasting is one of the best places for it.
Yeah, I think, as I listen to you, I think of like a few differences between music and podcasting. And I also think
Yes.
of like there is a lower barrier to entry to podcasting. I have
Yes.
a mic.
Completely.
I have a webcam. I don't even technically have to have the webcam, right? There's a few differences, right? There is one, anybody can start a podcast and get their name out there. So there's a lot of podcasts, right? That doesn't
Yes.
mean there's not a lot of music too, but like, and I'm sure it's a lot easier to make music nowadays than it was 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But also, which is kind of ironic because Web3 is very much financialization first.
Yeah.
In music, at least, maybe not quite this generation, but like right before Spotify, like people expected to pay for music. I don't know if they don't expect to pay for podcasts.
Yes.
So when they do, it's almost like there's this higher burden of either I really, really, really love this podcast, or I get tangible value from it. Because like I always compare me and my wife. Like I listen to podcasts just to learn about business, technology, Web3 broadly, just because I'm a hyper curious person. But my wife is a real estate agent and she only listens to real estate podcasts. Right. And like she finds the ones that are going to give her the most practical examples. And I bet if they gave her enough good content, she would go and buy their course or something like that. I think that's kind of boring. But like, I think as we transition into Web3, like Web3 is going to present like a whole new level of building a community that I feel like can grow on the current model, which I think you and I have talked about this before. The only successful monetization of community that I've been in our world, I'll call it our world, it's been acquired, right? Acquired, it's $99 a year. You get access to a Slack, and there's really good, smart people in the Slack where you can go get to know them. I've even gotten an intro to a VC for my friend's business idea because of this, in medical diagnostic testing, like not some, like plain consumer company kind of VC. So there's a lot of value there. I don't know how repetitive that is. So, when you were at the hatchery and there were these couple podcasts, did they already have listenerships and they just still weren't making money, or were they still in like build mode where, they may have, maybe 50, 100 people listening to their podcast? What like position in the podcast growth were they?
Yeah. So all these podcasts are relatively small. And the real question we came up with the podcast hatchery, right, is this, we're creating this NFT fan membership style that would sort of bring that acquired model into Web3. The big question is, how can small podcasts make that money, right? Like, if they have a small listenership, there isn't a guarantee that those listeners are all going to buy NFT fan memberships, right? And the real value of a community is the size of it, right? Like if you have 1,000, 10,000 members in that fan community, that's super valuable because you can connect with other members and connect with the hosts and do a lot of exciting stuff. But for smaller podcasts, isn't necessarily a great addition. In the podcast hatchery, we have 3 podcasts. And for us, we really only saw the real application of NFT memberships to be with the Bankless DAO podcast. This is a podcast that directly talks with Bankless DAO members, helps educate the rest of the DAO, which has 10,000 members, and was super, super valuable, which meant that it would be much, much easier to, create an NFT fan membership because it's directly tapping into that DAO community that's already created. So for them, even though it's a small podcast with 500 to 1,000 listeners, it was super, super valuable because they can sell a lot of NFTs because they're tapping into that already created community. For smaller podcasts, right, it's like, cool, you're creating these NFT fan memberships, but how do those smaller creators make money, right? And so for us, what we're trying to create is, sort of two sides to the coin. So on one side, we're going to have these fan memberships for the creators that get to 10,000 monthly listeners and beyond to make, real money off their 1,000 true fans. But for the smaller creators, right, the question is, how do those guys make money? Those have always been the people that have been left out. And then because of that, a lot of these smaller creators eventually give up because they're just not making money. For us, we're trying to create this, automated advertising system for the creators. We're taking 50, you're doing similar to YouTube, we're taking a 50-50 ad revenue and creating ads that play before every single most podcast episodes on the platform. For us, this is going to allow the smaller creators to submit their RSS feed to our platform and instantly start making money. When you see on Spotify or Apple, you submit your RSS feed, you're not making any money, right? Until you have thousands and thousands of fans. For us, because we have this automated ad system on the platform, that means these super small creators that are only getting 100 to 1,000 listens every single episode can instantly start making money. And, for me, one of the biggest things that motivated me to get into the tech industry as a whole and the music journalism industry as well, I started off with my own blog called ATL Vibes when I was like middle school. I was like, vibes, right? Like super cool.
That's insightful, man.
Yeah.
I still say vibes every day. So
yeah, vibes. But from Atlanta, got the vibes. So ATL Vibes made sense to me. But for me, when I was that super small writer, I was like, man, I'm making no money. But I put my website on Google Ads. So I had Google Ads on top of my website. And that was like the first dollar I made in writing. And I was like, wow, like this may be the start, but like, this is so cool. I can actually make money from what I love doing. And I thought it was so amazing. So for us, we want to have that experience with all these small podcasters where they say, wow, like my podcast can make money. Even like all I have to do is just create good content. And so for us, we think that's a really powerful experience. What we're really trying to do is, there's been this big article in the Web3 space, this idea, like TikTok, for example, right? They created this sort of creator grant program. So essentially, they paid creators essentially. So they had around 100 to $200 million put away for this program. And essentially every big creator, they get 0.001 cents per view or something like that. And that really benefited the big creators and made TikTok a long lasting platform that has creators coming back time and time again because they know they're going to make at least a little bit of money from the platform. That only affects the 100,000 followers plus. And so that gets the big creators getting money in. But, for Kickback, we're already planning on, funding those creators by having them launch their NFT DAO communities, right? So they don't need, another influx of money. For us, we're thinking about taking, sort of our 50% ad revenue and giving that back to the creators by creating this sort of grant program for small creators. So essentially, we're going to take, say we have $1,000 that comes in from ad revenue. We're going to take $500 and put that toward the grant program and go find those small creators that we really enjoy and say, hey, we want to fund you to take it to the next level for your podcast, get you editing software, get you mics, and all that's going to be done through our grant program. So for us, we're really having a big focus on the small time creators, allowing them to make money through that ad revenue, and then also sort of having them level up through that grant program, and hopefully, one day create that NFT fan community and start making, real substantial money. That's the real experience we see currently in the podcast world. There's a lot of big podcasts, and there's a lot of small podcasts that eventually taper off. And we really want to make sure there's big podcasts, even bigger podcasts with NFT fan communities. And we have those smaller creators, never taper off because, they're doing something they're passionate about and they're making, a decent amount of money every month. That's where we really see the vision of Kickback being. I think the Web3 technology can really create it. We just have to, implement it.
I mean, it sounds like first of all, this hits home hard because this is my issue, right? Like, yeah. I don't know if I even like to call it an issue because I'm doing what I love, right?
Yes.
getting out here, talking to smart people in Web3 who are as passionate about it as I am
Mhm.
from all over the place. And I just want to go make content, right?
Yes.
Like I don't want to, I have a great producer at Pretty Easy Podcasts. Holler at him if you
Mhm.
need it. Like I just want to interview people and learn and not focus on that. Although I do understand that it is important. It's not that I am naive to the fact that I need to make money from this at some point, but it's
Yeah.
always kind of been that like, I need to produce a lot of great content first because there's
Yes.
always the catch 22 of like, yeah, you can monetize, but you can't monetize till you have a big audience. So it sounds like
Yes.
what you're trying to do is you're trying to create like a middle class of podcasts, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
It's
like
a big
instead of just having like the stuff that slowly tapers off, the
Mhm.
lower socioeconomic podcasts, if you will, and then
Mhm.
just the outstanding ones, which we can talk about a little bit more later. But a lot of those people just, at least in one area, usually have the same guests over and over.
Yes.
Um, like how, and in order to do that, you kind of need the buy-in from some big podcasts to help the little guys kind of move up, right?
Mhm.
Like if you're going to
Mhm.
be, putting the ads of the small podcasts in front of the big podcasts and then splitting that with the little podcasts, the big podcasts are going to want to one, see some portion of that revenue, but two,
Yes.
like just kind of have the collective good in mind. Have you thought about how you're going to recruit people for this at all without giving away any trade secrets? I mean, I would love to hear it because I have
Yeah.
joined. Disclaimer: I joined Kickback.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're doing that ad revenue share similar to YouTube, 50-50, right? So we have 50% of revenue that we're taking. You do anything with that, right? So, what we're really looking to do with that money is to give back to listeners. We're going to do this through a monthly lottery, right? So, give back to those listeners through a monthly lottery for, $500 or anything like that. Do giveaways for listeners and exciting stuff like that. But in addition to that, give back to those, sort of middle class of podcasters. Podcast industry is wild, right? You talk to podcasters and they tell you up and down, side and sideways that they don't care about making money. And that is wild to hear, right? Who doesn't care about making money for doing something they're passionate about, right? And you can do it more. And that's crazy. Everyone says it. And for me, and like you see a lot of these quotes from these founders, and like Ford, for example, Henry Ford talked about, if I talk to people about what they wanted, they would say a faster horse, not a car. And for us, you talk to podcasters, and they would say they want discoverability, they want this, they want that, and ask them about monetization. They're like, oh, I don't care about monetization. And you're like, what? Like you don't care about monetization? You don't care about buying equipment for your podcast to make it better? So it's a crazy world. The music world. If you told a musician, hey, you're making no money for your music and you're gonna like it, they would be like, what the hell are you talking about? And so the podcast world it's a strange industry that this has come commonplace. And so we just believe it's wildly deterrent to the normal human behaviors. Like we believe that podcasters that make good content should be rewarded for it. And so we're trying to create the ecosystem for that. And we really think it's a big problem in podcasting, and we think if we can fix it, we can really allow a number of really high quality podcasts to be brought out of it. And we think this sort of middle class for podcasts is an important part. We see big podcasts out there. If you talk to listeners, they really only know the big podcasts, right? They know Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, but that middle class of podcasts really, gets not really that much shine onto it, right? Because, and this is another problem of podcasting we're trying to address as well. The discoverability of it just isn't good right now. Like you go on Spotify, you'll see the top 10 podcasts, top 100 podcasts. Small podcasts can say goodbye. Like they're not getting any discoverability on there.
Not unless it's word of mouth.
Yes, not unless it's word of mouth or on Twitter, right?
Yeah,
So those platforms, and this is one thing we've heard from all podcasters, is that discoverability is just not good. Like if you're a small podcast, you're going to struggle because you need that either those TikTok views, those Twitter likes to get listeners, and on those platforms, they're not getting any views. That's we've seen with Spotify and Apple these super high tech AI machine learning playlists that have allowed small time musicians to blow up, right? And that hasn't been done in podcasting, right?
Yep. And they
Like,
control so much of the market. Apple
it,
Podcast does.
yes, they control
Over
so
50%.
much of the market, and they just haven't created that, right? And like, you look at iTunes, right? Before this whole sort of machine learning created playlists, and the only people that were really making money on there were the big names, the Justin Biebers, the Drakes, because those are the people getting featured on the playlist or on the homepage of iTunes, right? And then when Spotify and Apple came along and they had these sort of, recommendation models that brought these smaller artists up for you to listen to, that really brought a lot of smaller artists into the scene. And TikTok has really, propulsion that as well, as they have a bunch of these sort of sounds that have really allowed smaller artists to blow up. And none of that happens in podcasting, which is crazy. And we really think that's a big problem as well. We're trying to create machine learning playlists similar to what Spotify has done for music in podcasting, bring these sort of new episodes to podcast. One of the other big things we're going to allow users to do is, clip podcasts and send them to their friends. We have some other stuff in the works to, increase discoverability as well. I won't say them now. But we really think discoverability is a big issue with these middle of the road podcasts, and has really hurt the industry as a whole, in my opinion. The big podcasts are the ones that have these big budgets that are backed by these big companies. A16Z has a big podcast. You know why? They have a big budget. They're a massive company, and they could do podcasting for free for a long time.
And they have the brand. They have the brand equity already.
They got the brands. It's like these smaller podcasts. They don't have that, and discoverability on the platforms is non-existent. Like, the only way I find Web3 podcasts right now, I got to Google search them. And on Spotify, if you're trying to find a good podcast to listen to, the really only way I do it is I go to the top 100 podcasts, right? And that puts out thousands and thousands of podcasts that just can't get into that list. It's a big problem. There are big problems in the industry. And a lot of these big players, Spotify and Apple, they've just been very distracted, right? Spotify has audiobooks, they got podcasts, they got music. Apple has really put a big focus on Apple TV and Apple Music. Apple Podcasts has really been put to the side. These big players have just largely been distracted and haven't really addressed some of these bigger issues. And, for Kickback, we're trying to be a podcast platform only right now. I won't say that in 5-10 years we move to music, that's definitely a possibility. But for us, we're trying to create a very good platform for podcasting, not for, music and audiobooks right now. And for us, we're trying to address those big problems that we see over and over again, and just seems like these big platforms won't address. So I think it's really, really important. I'm super passionate about the industry, and I think it's a big problem that needs to be fixed by someone. If no one's going to fix it, then I'll fix it. Like, that's how I see it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm hearing you speak, and I hear your passion, and I feel the problem of the small podcaster that is me. And I think about, so you started in music. You've identified the fact that, like, music was able to monetize at a greater scale and grow kind of like a middle class of musicians. And now you want to do the same thing for podcasts. I guess, what other like alignments from like a first principles perspective do you see for the listener of music and the listener of podcasts?
Yeah. The podcast world is very different from the music world. I think it's ripe for, big changes in it. In the music industry, there's record labels, there's big artists. In the podcast industry, there's just individual podcasters, which means it's a lot easier to, talk to the Joe Rogans and those big players. So I think it's a really big industry to, sort of take a share of right now. On the listener side, there's big differences between music listeners and podcast listeners. And I think that's part in the fact that, the Spotify music and podcasts and audiobooks just isn't really working out right now, because I listen to music in a very different way from when I listen to podcasts, right? When I'm working out, I listen to music to get me hyped up, right? When I'm like putting the laundry away, I listen to a good old fashioned podcast. Or when I'm working, I put a good old fashioned podcast on the back burner just so I can have some background noise. So music and podcasts are two completely different worlds, right? They have a lot of similarities in the sense that, it's audio through headphones or through your phone. But there are very different ways that are listened to. And I think a lot of these big players have been taking this approach of, oh, audio is audio. It's the same thing. We don't really have to worry about it. And I've been in both, right? Like I can see the big differences firsthand between the two industries. And I think like with podcasting, like a lot of these companies have to realize that these podcast listeners are listening in a very different way from music listeners. And I think that's an important thing to look at. For us, we're creating a lot of things that are antithetical to the general podcasting idea right now, right? Like the general idea of podcasting is that people put on a podcast, they put it on their phone, they put it in the, Bluetooth to their car, and they just drive. Like there's no active involvement on a podcast app right now. And so we're really trying to change that. We're trying to allow for, guests for listeners of podcasts to be able to discover new podcasts through an app and then in addition to that, connect with other listeners of a podcast, the podcast hosts all through an app, which is, very, very different from how podcast apps are right now, right? Right now, podcast apps are sort of invisible, right? People go to a podcast app, they click on a button and they put it away. They never look at it. On music, it's a little different, right? Like you go into a music app and you swipe through a little bit, you look at the playlists, look at the trending songs, and you do a lot more discoverability on that. With podcasts, it's very, very different, right? Like everyone has their one or two podcasts they listen to. They go to the Spotify or Apple app, they click on it, they press play, that's it. So there really is no discoverability on those apps. And it's very much a background player, right? No one really uses a podcast app. No one sits on their phone and goes, oh yeah, for the next 30 minutes, I'm just going to look through podcasts, look through the charts. Like that doesn't happen.
Wait. Before I go on a long run, I spent about 20 minutes looking for the right podcast.
Okay.
But
maybe
some.
Some.
That's the exception that proves the
rule. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of listeners that, they just put it on the background. They don't really worry about it, and that's it. And for us, we think there's a real market for people, if we create the right tools for people to go on an app and discover a new podcast, discover a new episode for 20, 30 minutes every day. For me, like I said earlier, the way I discover podcasts in Web3 is I go on Google, right? I've
had people find me on Google.
Yes, that's the way that's really the way, like the way to find Web3 podcasts right now. You go on Google or you go on Twitter. And I half the podcasts I've listened to right now, I didn't discover them through Spotify or Apple. I went on Google and I said, best Web3 podcast right now. And I looked through a top 10 list and I clicked on an episode and listened to an episode. And then I moved on or I continued listening. Right. And it's like, it's
and most of those articles people pay to be on.
Yes. Most of them they pay to be on. So it's, there isn't a platform out there, right, that you can find, episodes and podcasts that are interesting for you, unless they're in the top 10, top 100 podcasts in the world.
Can I brainstorm with you a bit?
Yeah.
So there's a few things you said that are interesting. If I could sum them up, one is music and podcasts have very different listeners. And yes. I tend to agree. If I'm trying to do good thinking on my own, then I am listening to music. If I'm trying to learn about something, then I'm listening to podcasts.
Yes.
If I miss half of a song, I don't give a shit. If I miss half of a podcast, what was the point of listening? Right?
Yeah.
Like I got to re-listen. I got to rewind it back. Oh man, I zoned out for a little while I was running or something like that. So it and I think the thing that keeps people coming back to podcasts isn't who the podcaster is most of the time, right? Maybe some of us like serial listeners, which I would consider myself, like I think Patrick O'Shaughnessy is the best podcast host because he pulls the best content out of his guests. Yes. And I give his guests a lot of content, a lot of credit for that because they're very advanced in their fields. But other than that, I mean, people are going into podcasts and they're finding by industry or they're finding by person. So it really comes down to the content.
Yes.
Right. I'm not going to listen to a song because it has certain words. Right. And obviously that does not include like hate words and stuff like that. But like if the lyrics don't quite speak to me, I'm not going to stop listening if I like the way it makes me feel. Right. So what is it that you can learn from the content of podcasts like mine, since of course it's the best.
Of course.
And like, can you feed, like, could you take the transcripts from these things, feed them into a machine learning algorithm, and actually produce quality insights for the people so that when they're scrolling through, they're actually like, the more time they spend on that 30-second to a minute clip or whatever, they're looking at, they can be like, well, actually, this podcast has a ton more of that quality content that you seem to like.
Yes.
You should go check it out. And by the way, because this is a smaller time podcast, you got to help them out. Give them $10 a month, give them $5 a month, something like that. I don't know if is that something you've thought about in terms of like dissecting the transcripts and doing sentiment analysis of the actual content of these podcasts and matching that with people?
Yeah. The podcast machine learning world is untapped right now, to say the least, right? And, I think there's a lot of different ways we can really tap into it. I think transcripts are a big, big part of that. But when you look at podcasts, transcripts are not a widespread thing yet. Like there isn't, people put on transcripts by themselves. There isn't, like, the platforms don't do that for you.
Right.
With lyrics, that just comes with, right? Which is a very different world. I think there's, like I said, there's a lot of things when you really look at podcasts, you're like, why is this the way it is? Why do podcast hosts accept no money? Why are there no transcripts, like auto-generated transcripts by these big platforms? And why can I not discover any smaller podcasts? And there's a lot of things that are like, why is this the way it is? This shouldn't be the way it is. It's not the way it is in music. But podcasts it's a very young market. Podcasts have really only come into real mainstream in the last 2 to 3 years. I would say, one of the big catalysts for that was the Elon Musk Joe Rogan podcast, right? That was when everyone was like, wow, like, what is this? This new form of media. Yes, yeah,
that had a lot to
exactly,
do
right?
with it.
That definitely like hit the mainstream media. But I think there's a lot of ways we can really tap into that machine learning. I think transcripts are a big way. I think looking at user generated content right now is a big way. One of the big ways that TikTok has incredible machine learning models is they have all this, they track everything from the user. So if you like a episode, you like a TikTok, and you search for a follower, or you follow some new account, they're going to use all that to serve you the best content. For us, we're really trying to create the machine learning models in a way that doesn't just put up the biggest podcasts in the world for you. You go on Spotify right now, and you listen to A16Z crypto podcast, and you're going to get a bunch of massive podcasts, right? You're not going to get any of those small players. And for us, we're really trying to be cognizant of that and sort of create almost like a SoundCloud for podcasts, right? This place where these smaller podcasters can really just show up in the algorithm. And obviously, like, we're going to see if this is effective for people. I mean, like, in my opinion, I think it's going to be effective, right? Like, if we show smaller podcasts and they show over and over again that these podcasts are turning out results, people are listening to them longer and more once we show them in their feed, then it doesn't make sense to not show them up, right? And I think a lot of algorithms right now, Spotify, it's very tough because they really only show the biggest podcasts, and that's it. The smaller podcasts, they aren't really shown at all. And I think it's a big problem with the machine learning models right there. I think transcripts and really feeding into that user data is really important for those machine learning models that we're going to create.
You don't really have an idea who your listeners are.
Yeah.
Right. With music, maybe still a problem. Right.
Yeah.
So like, why would podcasts that don't generate much revenue get that? I mean, this is like the conundrum. Like, there's plenty of articles out there, and they're not wrong, that say like podcasts are losing business. Right.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, there's so many people like us, like there's tons of people out there that listen to these things, and it's like one of their favorite things to do.
Yes.
Is listen to podcasts. So it's kind of like, now that I'm like thinking about this, it's kind of like running, right? Like there's this elite, like just culture, like really strong culture around running, but it's been really hard to monetize running, right? There's like all the apps for running are like, okay, Strava, shout out, you're pretty good. Or they sell out to Nike, or they sell out to Asics, and then, they kind of go downhill a little bit, right? So like, how can we create the way for people to just like get the value out of podcasts that they want. And it might not all be learning. In fact, most of the people I talk to are like, I just like to listen to like true crime.
Yeah.
I've never listened to one, but I mean, it seems to be something that is popular. There's probably plenty of true crime in Web3 for us to explore. We could go down the rabbit hole of finding influencers.
Yeah, like Silk Road.
Yeah, like Ross Ulbricht. We're interviewing Ross Ulbricht this week. But yeah, man, it's an uphill battle. I commend you for fighting it. I will be here for this. And as a small podcast who feels like I put out really good content, and I don't focus a lot on monetization, not because I don't care about it, it's because it's secondary.
Yeah.
Right. Primary is I want to learn and I want to teach my audience because I'm talking to people that have good stories to tell, that have interesting content to share with people, interesting learnings. And they're not the same 10 people that you've heard rotating between all the big podcasts.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I still listen to those people. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, because there's a reason those people are out there, right? Whether they're promoting a new book where they've taken their 10s, 20 decades of experience and synthesized it into something valuable. There is value there, but I think there's also a lot of value to maybe 1,000 people about, Web3 with me or about another smaller podcast. Because like my friends that listen to it, like they enjoy it, right? Like they're listening to it because they're my friend, right? Like to get them there is still just a friend thing. But once they listen to it, they call me, or I have friends that'll write tweet threads about it, right? Like it's not like they're not getting anything out of it. So like, how do we democratize that knowledge that people are getting from podcasts? I think is the ultimate question.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Spotify and, they're going through this very centralized approach right now. They're really trying to move away from RSS feeds, which have really, previously decentralized the whole industry. And in addition to that, they're really centralizing a lot of the content on the platform, right? Like you go into Spotify, they are promoting their own content, right? You go on there, you see Spotify originals, and that's it. Like that's the first thing you're going to see. And then after that, you're going to see the top big podcasts, and that's pretty much the end it goes for Spotify. For us, we're trying to take this really decentralized approach, right? Like we're trying to bring in RSS feeds and make that a mainstay for us. And in addition to that, really decentralize the learning and the content on there by bringing in those smaller podcasts. So I really see it as a centralized versus decentralized battle between Spotify and us. And I think what we've seen with Web3 is that decentralization is going to win out in the end. And I think it's going to be a big definition of the 2020s for the whole entire world. This idea of decentralization in everything, in all the markets, as being sort of mainstay. In the 2010s, centralization was the big thing for everyone, right? Facebook, Instagram, Google, Uber, right? Everyone's centralized because that was where the market really wanted. But now we're seeing a market shift, right? This idea of people wanting decentralization over centralization, seeing people really buy into this idea of, I want to see these smaller creators and I want to be able to invest in these smaller creators. And I think it's a big shift for the whole entire, world really. And I think we're really trying to play off of that with Kickback. And I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for what we're doing. Obviously Spotify is a big player. I'm just hoping that, our sort of attempt at decentralizing podcasts is a big enough play for us to, shake some things up.
That's good. And that's a good transition point. There's two questions that I ask every guest that I have not asked you yet.
Yeah.
The first one that I have for you is, how do you define Web3? I think I have an idea from your last answer.
Yeah. I really think decentralization is a big part of Web3. Like I said, before, I really see it as a centralized versus decentralized podcast platforms. Decentralization is playing a big part in the whole entire creator economy. And I think it hasn't touched podcasts yet. You look at the podcast industry, there isn't a big Web3 podcast player. The big player that we're playing against is an app called Fountain. They have 2,000 followers on Twitter. They're like basically unknown. So there isn't a big player in podcasting yet. I think, we're trying to be that sort of early mover, bringing all those really exciting smart contract development on top of this sort of idea of decentralization. And really play a part in this idea of decentralizing podcasting. And then for me, I really see, when people think of crypto or Web3, they immediately go to DeFi, right? Decentralized finance things such as, Coinbase or Uniswap or these lending protocols. For me, I think where Web3 is really going to make an impact is in this creator economy. Creators have for a long time been underpaid and undervalued by these platforms. Platforms have taken everything from these creators, right? Facebook doesn't pay anything to their creators on the platform. Instagram doesn't pay anything. Snapchat sort of pays with their reels. TikTok sort of pays with their grant program, with their creator fund. Sorry, but right now these big platforms, they're really giving nothing to the creators. And for us, we're a creator platform, and we will forever be a creator platform. I think that's the value of what we're bringing. We're trying to create the best place for podcast creators to make money, to connect with their fans, and for fans to earn money for their attention on the platform. And I think it's a big value add for everyone. I'm really excited for it. I think it's a big addition for everyone involved. And we just have to, like I said way earlier, just gotta play on the ideas that we're creating and create the technology behind it. We've created a full website and app, basic podcast player. Now we're creating this sort of listen to earn aspect on top of it, and then eventually creating these NFT fan communities, all within end of the year. We're currently deciding on which chain we're going to put it on, but yeah, I mean it's a really exciting space. I think Web3 is really important for DeFi, but I think it's even more important for the creator economy.
Cool. So my final closing question is about the future. Where do you see yourself in Web3 in the next 6 to 12 months? And then where do you see yourself in Web3 in the next 5 to 10 years? And you can be as outrageous as you want.
Yeah.
Last week, my guest told me there was going to be a live Beeple NFT where people's faces were getting melted and their heads were getting chopped off. So if that, not to put you on the spot, but just
I don't know if I'll go that far.
But that is how wild it gets on here at Web3 with me.
I mean, in 6 to 12 months, I see, and I've seen it early, we're getting real interest from podcasters to create these NFT fan communities, right? I think this idea of Web3 NFT fan communities for big time creators is really attractive. We've seen it with Acquired. We've seen it with Bankless HQ. They have these massive Discords and Slacks with thousands of members. But they really haven't monetized that, right? Acquired sort of has with their $99 subscription. But, a lot of these other podcasts haven't really created that same type of thing. For me, I think I'm really passionate. I think for us, I've had other people that say, listen, earn is where we're really going to grow. For me, I think this NFT fan communities could massively change the podcast industry in the next 6 to 12 months. We just have to create, the technology behind it. In 6 to 12 months, I think for podcasts, I really believe there's going to be a big Web3 podcast player out there in the next, 12 to 24 months. I'm terrified, right? I think I constantly tell my developers and my team, I'm like, we're not moving fast enough. There is going to be a big Web3 podcast player that is going to make massive market moving changes. And I tell everyone I work with, right? I'm like, that got to be us. Like, I am not going to sit here and, be like, man, if I did this, I did that, we could have been the next Spotify, right? Like, I think for us, we're trying to be that early mover and really bring in a lot of these exciting Web3 technology the next 6 to 12 months and hopefully outbeat the next big Web3 player. I think it's, Web3 podcasting is coming soon. People may look at the market and see nothing. I'm telling you, 6 to 12 months, 24 months even, there's going to be tons and tons of people in it. We're just trying to move fast enough to be that top dog, right? In the next couple months. For us, I think it's really important to quickly move. I think Web3 and podcasting is going to be massively changed in the next couple months. In 5 to 10 years, I envision a ton of these podcasts being all Web3. For me, I'm very, very into this idea of, abstracting away a lot of these really intense Web3 ideas. Not everyone knows what Ethereum gas is and all these, like how a MetaMask wallet works. I think it's all very confusing for the normal day user. And a lot of people that are in Web3, they say, oh, they're just going to figure it out, right? No one knew the internet in the 2000s. Now everyone knows the internet. But, I would say in argument to that, you know, not a lot of people know how a website works, right? They just go on ESPN or Google and they click into a little input button and they press enter, right? That's really all that's happening. They can't tell you that there's a back end and a front end and all this fancy stuff going on, because it's all abstracted away. And I think a lot of the stuff with Web3 is going to be abstracted away in 5 to 10 years. For me, I envision Kickback. A lot of the technology we're going to be creating is going to be put into the back end. I think with Web3 as a whole, I think you're going to be able to go onto a app or a website and you're not going to even know how Web3 really works. You're just going to know what everyone knows what an NFT is. Everyone knows how to buy, everyone can figure out how to buy crypto. I think in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be as simple as clicking a button. Like you're going to download an app, you're going to put in your email or your bank account or whatever, and you're going to press buy now, and it's just going to buy. And it's going to be super, super easy. For me, I think it's this sort of controversial. I think Google and Apple are really going to be some of the biggest players in this sort of wallet ecosystem. Right now, MetaMask is the biggest player, and everyone says, these Web2 companies aren't going to figure it out. I would say that, Apple and Google aren't stupid. They know what's going on. They have massive advantages. Apple Podcast is not a great app. It's a decent app, right? But it isn't something that people love and adore like Spotify, right? And yet, because Apple has that advantage of having phones, right? They have this massive advantage of that sort of native app. And I think once Apple and Google create this sort of abstracted wallet on top of either Google Chrome or Android app or Android phone or the Apple phone, it's going to massively open the market. Apple has been very, very anti-crypto, and for good reason, right? In the App Store, they take 30% of every collectible item bought from an app, which is insane. I'll say right now, we're creating app, a podcast platform is a app experience. It is insane how much they take. And so they're taking this approach of being very anti-crypto, which I think is the wrong approach. I think if they are able to create a wallet in the next 5 to 10 years that is put onto every single phone that every single person has, that is going to make them 10 times the amount of money that they're making from the App Store. And I think that's really, really where the big thing's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. These Web2 companies have to move fast. I know it's going to hurt their business model in the short term, but in the long term, they got to make these big changes. We've seen with Meta, right, or Facebook or whatever they want to call it. If there's another name change in the next 5, 10 years. But with Meta, they're taking this big approach of, hey, we want to be the next, this idea of the metaverse, right? I don't think they're going to figure it out. But, I think all these Web2 companies are going to take this big stab into this Web3 idea and, say, we want to be either privacy like Apple, we want to be either the metaverse like Facebook, and then Google and Uber and all these other companies, they're going to figure out where they're going to be placed in that. So I think next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be big companies, companies that we thought can never fail, right? That Google, like Netflix, we've seen is already failing, right? Never, everyone would have said Netflix is going to be here for forever, right? It's FANG, it's Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, right? There goes Netflix. What can happen to Google or Facebook, right? There's big things happening. I think these companies that you think would never fail could potentially fail in the next 5, 10 years. And I think Web3 is going to play a part in that.
Cool. That was a great answer. Thank you very much, Alexander. I've really enjoyed the conversation and enjoyed getting to know you. I'm sure we're going to be spending a lot more time together as we both are huge Web3 advocates. So thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining Web3 with me. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review, as it'll help us reach more people. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @offedge_. Thanks for vibing in the verse with me, and hope you'll join us next time.